right, tonight we continue our study in the birth of Christ, the surrounding events concerning it in Matthew and in Luke. And as we've seen now, and I want to keep bringing it up again and again, in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John is not one of the Synoptics, so we take him off. Mark does not cover the birth of Christ, and so we take him off. And so we've been going back and forth with Matthew and Luke, looking at the birth of Christ. Now, so far we have studied about the conception of John the Baptist and the conception of Jesus, Joseph's revelation, birth of John the Baptist, birth of Jesus. And now then, tonight, we're down to Herod's attempt to kill Jesus. So we turn now to Matthew chapter 2 and verse 16, and we pick up our story as we are studying there. Now, in Matthew the second chapter, let's remember that Matthew looks at it from just the viewpoint of the baby has been born in Bethlehem. The wise men have come to seek him. Herod hears about the wise men. He checks out where the Christ is supposed to be born, finds it in Bethlehem. He said, you go worship him, then you come back, tell me where he is, that I may go worship him. The Lord appeared to the wise men and said, you go back another way, don't go back and tell Herod. So they went back a different way. Then the Lord appeared to Joseph and told Joseph, you take the young child and head down to Egypt because Herod is going to try to kill him. So that's where we left off our study then last week. So tonight we begin then in Matthew chapter 2 and in verse 16. So here it says, then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth. Sometimes you just need to stop and meditate for just a minute and try to picture that old boy as he's sitting there. How would you feel if you were king, if you were the meanest king that's ever lived, or at least one of the meanest kings that's ever lived? You've killed thousands of people. The power is the only thing that you really desire in life, to be the king, to be obeyed. And now then, you have heard that this baby is going to be born. He's king of the Jews. And then you tell these wise men, come and tell me. So the king says, you come back and tell me. And then they go the other way. How would you feel? Could you just see him sitting there boiling when he saw he was mocked of them? That means that they were just didn't care anything about him, laughed at him and the way that he went. And so he now is getting ready to take matters in his own hand. It says, he sent forth and slew all the male children that were in Bethlehem and in all the borders thereof from 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had exactly learned of the wise men. So here then we have him getting ready or actually killing these people. This is an actual picture of Herod that they've got over there. That's the way the guy looked. And so now that he sends over and has these babies killed. Now, it's kind of interesting. You say, well, they're not even mentioned. These babies aren't even mentioned in Herod's history. As you start reading about the histories of Herod and so forth, they're not mentioned. Well, obviously, Herod's not going to put it in there. And the event, in reality, was a rather small event in comparison to other things that Herod had been doing. So look right here at really what Herod was. He was so mean that Augustus, the Roman emperor, who had killed many people himself, he said, I'd rather be his swine than his son. Because you can't trust him. He kills his own kids. Now, Herod had killed his brother, grandfather, and mother of his favorite wife. He had several wives. One of them was he madly in love with, very favorite. He killed her brother, grandfather, her mother, and then he ended up killing her. And then he had 2 of his own sons killed that he had by her. So he's killing people in his own family here. Now, he murdered the children at Bethlehem. Then, excuse me. Well, put it here. I forgot right up here. While he's on his deathbed, he had another son strangled 5 days before his death. How bad was this guy? See? So now then, it goes ahead here telling that he murdered these little children. And then the last thing that he did was he put out an order to have, right before he died, he put out an order. He said, I want you to go out, round up all of the leaders in the nation, and lock them up. And they're all to be locked up. And the very moment that you hear of my death, they're all to be killed. You kill them all. Because he said, there will be mourning when I die. Well, the people didn't do it. His family didn't do it. The other people didn't do it. They didn't go out and get these people, so those people weren't put to death that's in there. But you can see, out of all the atrocities that he did, really, killing a few babies was not such a bad thing, was it? If you can put it that way. Yeah, it was a horrible thing. It was a horrible thing under circumstances by anybody else, but I'm saying here is a mass murderer, a guy that's done all this killing, and so you don't see it much. Think about it in this way. Micah himself said, but thou, Bethlehem, which art little among the thousands of Judah. In other words, Bethlehem was just a small city. So now it was a small city of, we don't know how many people that was there, probably, 50 homes, something in that vicinity. And I thought, okay, I got out the directory and I counted it. We have 87 families in here in this congregation, 160 people, and I could come up with 3 infants that fall in this age, see? And so as he goes over, he's not going to be killing hundreds and hundreds of infants, as sometimes that we think about in there. Another thing to think about, during the first year of a child's life, they were said to be 1 year old. And so when a child was born, a child was what we'd say is 2 months old. You'd ask, how old are they? Well, they're 1 year old. In other words, this is their first year. And then as they started out then, at the end of the 12 months, then they're 2 years old. So it could well be that he killed the children from what we would say 1 year old and under, you see, and where it says 2 years old, according to the way they counted it, why it would be 2 years old there. So there wouldn't be a massive amount of children that's killed, is the point I'm getting at. But there would be some, and it would be a horrible, terrible event. Now, I want us to look at some of the prophecies that we have here, because look in the very next statement in here, when at verse 17, he had exactly learned from the wise men, then he killed them, said, then was fulfilled that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet, saying, a voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she would not be comforted because they are not. Now, here it is. He quotes Jeremiah here about this situation and said, now when he killed these babies in Bethlehem, then was fulfilled this prophecy. Now, let's talk a little bit about prophecies here that we had, and we talked some about them last time. Now, first of all, when we get back to the first prophecy that we had in this passage, that is, Herod said, where is the Christ to be born? And they said, in Bethlehem of Judea. Now, here we have what we would say is a prediction or the foretelling of a future event. When I say a prediction, a lot of times we think, well, I predict something, it may or may not come to pass. I'm talking about divine prediction. I'm talking about absolute correct prediction, see? In other words, telling something before it happens. So this right here is where Micah, some 800 years before the Christ was ever born, he prophesied, he predicted, he told, he foretold that the Christ will be born in this little insignificant city. So he hit the nail on the head there, and that would just be a direct prophecy foretelling future events. Now, the last time when we closed out, we talked about God telling Joseph to take him down to Egypt, and so he went down to Egypt, then he came back. It said that it might be fulfilled, out of Egypt did I call my son. Now, this is a unique prophecy because when you go back to Hosea and read that, that originally was talking about the children of Israel. That was talking about how that they went down to Egypt, God called them out. So, but it was a new, unique situation here. And so this is what we would call typical, or a type. Now, by a type, how many types did they have in the Old Testament that you could come up with and think about? The blood of Christ, and the altars, and the ark, and the tabernacle, and on down the line. All of these were types of things that come in the New Testament. Now, this right here was also a type. God manipulated nations. God drew charts so people could understand. Instead of putting them on a chart like I have up here, a little insignificant thing, he used whole nations. He used the nation of Israel, sent it down to Egypt for 400 years, then brought it back up and said, now, my son, I've called out of Egypt, setting the stage so that hundreds of years from now, 1,600 years from now, his son would be going down to Egypt and come back up, just like he had drawn this picture in the Old Testament back there. When you study the book of Galatians, in the book of Galatians, Paul parallels Mount Sinai with the church. And so he says now, Mount Sinai and Sarah, they represent this, and over here is Hagar and Ishmael, and they represent that. And so really, when you get down to it, God took Abraham and his life, he took Isaac, his life, Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, all those things that you read, and you think, well, why did he bring in Hagar? Why was it that this happened and that happened? When it's all over, then you can see, then they tell you, okay, this is God giving us types. This is God drawing us pictures so we can understand certain things later on. So as I look at it, I say, okay, here's the way it is. You take a preacher today, like me. I can work all day long trying to draw up a chart. When I draw up that chart, how big is it? See? Little old thing, can't get it on any bigger thing than that, just a little insignificant thing. When God drew up his charts, when he laid it out to show how things are going to happen, what did he use? He used nations. He used people, the lives of people. He used these types. So in the Old Testament, you have all kind of these types which are very significant. That's another kind of prophecy that you have there. Now then you have this one. Now when you have this one, you go back and you study this. And what happened was that Rachel had lived down at Bethlehem, and she had died with her in a childbirth, and she was buried there. Now then Babylon came down and conquered Judah and took all the people in that area, everybody out of Bethlehem, everybody out of Judea, took them all out, put them in prison, and marched them off. And so Jeremiah is trying to show how the people felt. And it says, Rachel would not be comforted. Rachel, he pictures her as crying in her tomb. There's no way to comfort her. The pain is so deep, there is no comfort that is there, you see. So it's kind of like if we were saying something, somebody did something today, and we say, well, if somebody knew that, they'd turn over in their grave. It's showing that person that's dead would not approve of it. Well, Rachel was crying in her grave. It's a descriptive way of showing this. So what it is great sorrow in Bethlehem. Now then, what we have here is, when these little babies were born, then we have the same kind of sorrow again. Now this is a prophecy about events that are the same. In Bethlehem, the same thing is happening now with these little babies killed as happened back there. There was no comfort. There was crying. They would not be comforted, as you could see would be the truth when little babies are killed by Herod in this way. So it's events of the same nature. Now, we'll have one more before it's all over, but let's go ahead now with verse 19. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise and take the young child to his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for they are dead that sought the young child's life. So now, Herod's dead. The angel says, now, Joseph, you can take Jesus back up to Israel. And he arose and took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. And when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go hither. And being warned of God in a dream, he withdrew into the parts of Galilee. Now, as you look at this, undoubtedly, he was coming back to Bethlehem. The supposition is, as you read this, when Joseph left Nazareth, went down to Bethlehem, that's probably where he intended to stay, was down in that area. So he goes down to Egypt. He's coming back up now to Judea in the Bethlehem area in here. And he comes back up, and he hears then Archelaus, one of the sons of Herod, is ruling in that area. Well, he knows about these guys. He knows about the sons, and this is one of the meanest ones. This was a mean one. He was a guy that he didn't have a chance to be as mean as his daddy. He wasn't as smart as his daddy, didn't rule as long as his daddy, but he was mean. He was so mean, and he caused so many atrocities that finally the Roman Caesar banished him, took him out, pulled him back, banished him into a place after he had served down here for 11 years. So as bad as the Roman government was, they said, we can't stand that guy. So they took him and exiled or banished him. Now, Archelaus was a mean dude. He was the son of Herod the Great. And Joseph was afraid to take Jesus back while this mean guy was there. And now, then, it says, being warned of God in a dream. So God warned him and let him know, you're right, Joseph. Get out of this area. Don't trust Jesus in Archelaus' hands. So he withdrew into the parts of Galilee. Now, when he goes to Galilee, what city would he be going back to? What city is in Galilee that he's familiar with? Nazareth. That's where Nazareth is. So now he's going back up to Nazareth. So he heads back up to Nazareth, and look what it says in verse 23. And came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken through the prophets, that he should be called a Nazarene. Now, he's going to go back up there, and Jesus now will be brought up in Nazareth. From the time that he's about 2 years old, somewhere in that vicinity at this time, up until he's 30 years of age, he's going to be living in Nazareth. He then will move on over into Capernaum and some other areas there. But he's going to go to Nazareth, and it says, so that it might be fulfilled, which is written in the prophets, he should be called a Nazarene. Well, this is an interesting passage right here. This is an interesting prophecy in here, because when you go to the prophets, there are no statements that said he would be called a Nazarene. It's not there in any of the prophets. And yet, here it is, Matthew says, he didn't say as it was spoken in the prophet, or a prophet said it, did he? In other words, if a prophet called him this, then you'd expect it to be there. But it's in the prophets, the plural. So, but it's not there. None of them mention that. So you say, well, is there an explanation of it? Yeah, there is. What was Nazareth noted for? It was a little insignificant place, but it had notoriety. It had a reputation. You remember what it was noted for? You remember later on when Andrew is bringing his brothers, Peter's bringing Andrew and so forth to Christ, and said, Jesus of Nazareth. Do you remember what they said? Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? I mean, who ever heard of any good thing coming out of Nazareth? What kind of reputation did Nazareth have? See, it was a insignificant, poor city. Nobody would ever have heard of it except in a derogatory sense if Christ hadn't been born there. Everybody in the world knows about it now. You see, it's famous. But that was because, or not he was born there, but he was raised there. But Nazareth was a city of kind of a despicable city. Now, evidently, what it's talking about is that all the prophets describing Jesus, when they described Jesus, how did they describe him? When Jesus comes, when the Christ comes, he will come and be born in a dignified family, living in a rich house, riding white horses. Is this the way it is? No. See, he's going to be a poor, insignificant individual, beaten down, finally killed. He won't even have a place to lay his head. He's a poor, insignificant person. So you'd say, well, well, he's a Nazarene. That's what these people are. They're Nazarenes. When this girl, was beating her little baby back there, she was talking about whether she's a member of the Irish Travelers. Well, I never heard of an Irish Traveler, but what does Irish Traveler mean? We've all learned of it now. And so for the people back there who knew about it and so forth, if you try to say somewhere, we're going to tell Mike, somebody's asked me, say, what kind of guy is Mike? He's an Irish Traveler. What does that mean? He may not ever even known what it is, but if I call him an Irish Traveler, what does it mean? He's a bum. He's just going around bumming off of people, untrustworthy. So that's the significance of it, and that's what came out of this thing, and so forth. So there are terms that are used to describe certain kind of people. So what kind of guy is Mike? Oh, he's a Nazarene. You see, back in those days, what would it mean? He's just a insignificant person that doesn't have much to offer that is there. So this would be what this one is down here. In other words, it would be a descriptive. The word describes the situation. Now, in this chapter, you have those 4 different kinds of statements that he talks about prophecies. Okay? Prophecies telling about events that would happen. Now, again, I'll say, normally when we think about a prophecy, what do we think about? Which one of these 4 do we think about? Which one is used 99% of the time? It's number 1, you see, that is up there. But as you study the chapter, that's what you find. Okay, so now then we've got Jesus back up at Nazareth. At this time, he would be about 2 years of age. Now then, let's study about his life between 2 and 12. And to do this, we'll have to go to these passages here. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 22, we've already studied that, where it tells about why he went back up to Nazareth. So now then, let's turn over to Luke chapter 2 and verse 41. We'll pick up the story now. He's back up to Nazareth. So what does he do while he's back up in there then? What's the situation that goes on at that time? Okay. In Luke 2, 39 is really where I want to go. Now, we left off at 38 the last time. See? We left off at 38 the last time. And when they had accomplished all things that were according to the law of the Lord, that's down at Jerusalem. What did they go down to Jerusalem to do, to accomplish according to the law of the Lord? What was it? Purification of Mary and the circumcision of Jesus. Now, when they had accomplished all these things according to the law, they returned into Galilee to their own city, Nazareth. So now we have them back up to Nazareth. Now, all right, verse 40. What did he do between 2 and 12? And the child grew and waxed strong, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. So now, as he's growing up, he's becoming a strong individual. He's waxing strong. He's a good, healthy young man, is what we would say. And he's filled with wisdom. What would that be? 10-year-old boy, 8-year-old boy, filled with wisdom. Well, we've seen occasions where a child will just stand out from other children. You got 6, 10-year-old boys out here, and they say, let's go over and do something, let's go over and throw a rock over there at the Williams house, or let's go do something, see? And this one kid says, no, I don't think we should do it. Oh, you big sissy, you. Now, I know what I would have done if you called me a sissy. The rock could be through the window, see? Well, that's a fool. But he says, no, let's stop and think about it. See, let's stop and think about it. I'm thinking about a young kid right now, and some of you know him. It's Deb Gerke's boy. And he was about 10 years old, and he had to raise his mom, really. I mean, that's the way that it was. They would go along, and it just every once in a while, it was just all the time. Now, Mom, you sure you want to do that? That looks kind of foolish to me. And so one time she was going to jump out of a plane in a parachute. Oh, she was so excited. She comes to church, and I'm going to jump out of here, next Tuesday, and we're going to do this and do that and so forth. And so a couple of days later, she tells me, she said, I decided not to. And I said, what did you decide not to? Oh, she said, he set me down. I forget his name now. He set me down, the 10-year-old boy, and he said, Mom, have you ever considered what would happen to me if you get killed? Now, the chances are the parachute will open. You see, that the chances are that everything will be fine. But the only thing you're doing is just having fun. It's not anything you need to do. You're just having fun, and you're putting your life in danger just to have fun. Doesn't your child mean more to you than that? Do you think there was some wisdom in that? That's a lecture he gave her. And so she comes and says, I'm not jumping. Now, she was a fool. She jumped 3 or 4 years later. But she didn't. Well, that's a wise kid, you see, that you have there. Jesus was filled with wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to look ahead and see the effect of your action. In other words, what are we going to do right now? Well, we look at it, and it's going to be fun. Okay, let's go do it. It's going to be fun. It's something I want. I really want. See? Now, okay. Now let's look ahead and see what will be the effect. If I do it, if I have all this fun right now, what will be the effect down there? Will it be a dangerous situation? Will it be something that will get me in trouble with the law? Will it be something where I might get hurt? Will it? And so you look ahead and you say, no, I don't think we should do that. Wisdom is being able to see the end from the beginning and say, no, I'll make a decision based on that rather than just right now. So fools act on the basis of what I want is right now. Isn't that the way we get in head over heels in debt? I want this. Bing. Got a credit card. I want that. Bing. Got that. I want this. Bing. And we don't ever stop until the credit card's full. Then what do we do? Get a new credit card. They're coming all day long. Bing. Bing. And we don't stop to think of what's going to happen down here. That we're going to lose our house. We're going to be in all kind of trouble. And the world is full of people that way, financially speaking. Now, the wise person is going to look ahead and say, yeah, I want that right now. But what will that cost me? And look ahead and make your decisions financially, in pleasure, having fun, whatever you do, being able to look ahead. Jesus, growing up, and he was a wise boy. He was able to look ahead and make decisions this way. Now then in verse 41, there was something that happened to Jesus at age 12 that, again, all of us are familiar with. I think this is a significant thing. Between the ages of 2 and 12, only one thing told us about Jesus. One event, and that's this one right here. See? Now, and his parents went every year to Jerusalem at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up after the custom of the feast. Now, Jewish boy, when he reached 12, he was supposed to go with his dad. And so he did go up, and his mom went up this year too. They went up then after the custom of the feast. When they had fulfilled the days that as they were returning, they would have been there a week. As they were returning, the boy Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and his parents knew it not. But supposing him to be in the company, they went a day's journey, and they sought for him among the kinsmen and acquaintances. And when they found him not, they returned to Jerusalem. Now, again, you stop and you think, how could parents miss a kid for a whole day? See? How could that be? Now, I expect some of you here have probably done that with your kids. You've left them, and you say, where did we? Oh, I think they're over here, or I think they're over here, or something of this nature. But now, how would this boy have been traveling at this time? In a group. All the Jews up in Galilee have had to come down to Judea. All the Jews in Galilee are heading back to Judea. They're walking back. Well, do you suppose they walk back by families, hand in hand? Especially if a kid was 12 years old. They'd be running around in groups and running. And today, our society's changed so much that we hardly let our kids out of sight. But a few years ago, let the kids run wherever you want them to run. Just turn them loose and let them run. And that's what was happening here. It's a normal thing. When evening came, it was time to round up the kids. They couldn't find Jesus. And so they're worried to death. So they came back to Jerusalem seeking for him. And it came to pass, after 3 days, they found him in the temple. So they came back. Now, I suppose this would be a day's travel back, and then on the third day, they found him. See, at some time during that day, then they found him. And they found him in the temple. Now, as you look at it, where they would find him, it would be there's a picture of what the temple looked like. Be lots of people around there, and they came and they found him in the temple, and he's in there talking to the scribes then. Okay, it says, and it came to pass after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of teachers, both hearing them and asking them questions. Now, he was just amazing them, but he was listening and he was asking questions. And all that heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. So, can you tell anything about somebody by the questions that they ask? Whether they're thought-provoking questions or just questions out of the air, see? And so he's sitting here, and he's listening to the teachers. But he'll ask the teachers questions. And they're thought-provoking questions. And they have the teachers amazed. What kind of kid is this? 12 years old. What? They hadn't seen anything like it. This child, 12 years old, has a perception and understanding of the law that others don't seem to have. And so they've got this question and answer situation going back. Now his mom and dad, when they saw him, they did what any mom and dad would do. They were astonished. In other words, what's he doing here? In with all of these big guys, all these people here, the elite that's in the temple. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou dealt with us? Why have you done this to us? So it's a rebuke. She said, Behold, thy father and I sought thee sorrowing. In other words, we've been upset. We've been crying. We've been really upset. See? So she's bawling him out. And he said unto them, Well, how is it that you sought me? Didn't you know that I must be about my father's business or in my father's house? It depends on which translation you have there. Now, what this means, let me explain why you got two readings here. In the Greek, the Greek sometimes will use what is called ellipsis. Now, we do exactly the same thing. Ellipsis is where you leave out a word if you know your listeners understand what you're talking about. If I looked over here to Lee and I said, give me the Bible, what did I leave out? I left out you. See, left out the subject. See? And when we know somebody understands what we're talking about, we leave out words. We do that all the time. That's called an ellipsis. Now, Greeks seem to be more fond of it than what we do. And so here's what they say, here's what it says really in the Greek, and then you can fill it in right here. It says, He said, knew you not that I must be in that I must be in my Father's? That's it. Didn't you know that I must be in my Father's? Put something in there. What is it? Is it the house, the temple? Didn't you understand I would be in my Father's temple? Or didn't you understand I would be in my Father's business, taking care of the business, the activities of my Father? So you got to put that word in. So that's why some translators will say he's talking about in the Father's house. Others will say in the business of my Father's. So it's one of the two there that you have. But what he's saying is, at any rate, didn't you know that I would be about what my Father would have me to be, whether it's here in his temple or whether it's about his business of teaching the law? Didn't you understand that? Don't you understand that? And 50, and they understood not the saying which he spake unto them. They said, no, I don't understand what you're talking about. Now, this is a time to step back and reflect. And again, now we're out in the world of reflection, because the Bible doesn't tell us anything. How much did Jesus know at age 12? How much did he know about himself? Did he know he was the Son of God at this age? Or did he think he was Joseph's son? Had he been told how he was conceived in the womb? We're not told any of these things. See, we don't know. What did Jesus know? Now, from this statement here, when he says, well, didn't you know that I would be about my Father's business? Doesn't that indicate to you that he did realize he was the Son of God? You see, that God was his Father? And how he knew it, I don't know. Now, they didn't understand. Well, that brings us into another thing, looking from Dad and Mom's viewpoint. From Dad and Mom's viewpoint, what is their job? Is their job every day to teach Jesus, now you're the Son of God? No. What's their job? Raise the child. Just raise the child. Mary, you're going to have a child. Joseph, take her. That's it. That's their laws. They're not told. Now, it's your responsibility to instill in him he's the Son of God. It's your responsibility to teach him all the law. They weren't told any of this. They are to raise the child as any Jewish parents would raise a child, raising the Son of God. Now, when he makes this statement, didn't you know that I must be about my Father's business or in my Father's house? That kind of shocked them. They didn't know what he was talking about. That is there. Which I think indicates to me that this was not a big thing in their household of every day reminding him, now I want to remind you who your father is, you see. It wasn't of that nature, because when he said, did you know I must be about my Father's business, they understood not. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he was subject unto them, and his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. So he goes home with them, and he obeys them. He's subject to them. So he's an obedient child, and his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. Now, you mothers can understand this and meditate on this more than the dads can, but do you remember what Mary did when the shepherds came in and told about what happened? It said she bounced these things off of her head, inside her head. You remember that? She meditated on those things. She thought about those things. And here it is. She's keeping all these things in her heart. she's remembering all of these. Now, she's having some unusual things that no other mother has ever had or ever will have, you see, in some of these events that we have here. Okay, now verse 52. Verse 52 is an interesting verse. This is the only verse that tells you anything about Jesus between the ages of 12 and 30. Now, what was he like when he's 15? Well, he was obedient to them. He was subject to them. But what was he like when he was 25? What did he do between the age of 12 and 30? Okay, here's what it says. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and men. Now, if you, as a human, had been writing a book about the Son of God, would you have put all those years in one little verse? Or written volumes, you see, that is in there. Now, here's what it says. I want you to notice this because this is a very interesting verse. One you can talk about hours. You can talk about it. I use it a lot in marriage counseling and so forth. But here it is. And Jesus advanced in wisdom, stature, favor with God and men. That verse tells you everything there is about a human being. That one verse tells you everything there is about a human being. You look at it. Every human being has a mind, as refers to with wisdom. He advanced. Now notice what he did. He increased. He's increasing. He's learning. He's advancing in his mind, learning, developing that mind. God created everybody with a body. That's stature. He increased in stature. He grew with his body. He cared for his body. It was important for him to do this. He had a spirit. That's in favor with God. His spiritual relationship with God. He kept growing and growing and growing, as we would all do, in learning more and more and more. And with men. And that's his social part. The social part of man. Now, when God created man with those four parts. Every human being has those four parts. Okay? And every human being has a responsibility of taking care of those four parts and developing those four parts. And if we want to be like Jesus, then we are going to spend, especially our years in here, up to 30, increasing, developing, that's the job, in those four realms that is right there. So those are the four parts of all human beings that's there. When I say I use this a lot of times in marriage counseling, I say, okay, over here's a man. Now, man has a certain kind of body. Man thinks a certain way. Has the way he thinks. Has certain kind of a social life, activities that he likes. And he has a spirit. Now, a woman has a different kind of body. She has a different kind of mind. She thinks differently. Her social, the way she relates to other people, is differently. But her spirit is the same as man. In other words, that's what puts them on an equal value plane. But in those other three ways, she's different. Now, we take these two men, we take two people, they have two separate bodies, two separate minds, two separate social attitudes, and let's suppose that they are, if they don't marry in the faith and have the same type of spiritual relationship, they'd have two of that. How many marital problems do you suppose they're going to have? Okay? It's just going to be full of marital problems that you've got. And so it can be used then in that way. So there are the four different parts. Now, we bring the first part to a conclusion because in our next lesson, we're going to be talking about the ministry of Jesus. We'll pick him up at 30 years of age. Look at the evidences at this point. We'll go through them rapidly. Here it is. We're told he would be born of a virgin, born of a woman. He'd be a son of God. He descended from Abraham, Isaac. There's all the Old Testament prophecies, you see. And he has fulfilled all of these prophecies that we have here to this point. He didn't get to choose where he'd be born. He fulfilled all of that. When you look at the testimonies, there's testimonies we have. An angel testified to Mary, Holy Spirit to Elizabeth, Holy Spirit to John. Who in the mother's womb, the babe, an angel talked to Zacharias. Zacharias testified. Simeon on his deathbed. Anna, the old lady, 100 years old or more. Angels testified to shepherds. Wise men testified. In other words, we have all these people that are closing in and pointing and saying, this is the Son of God. And so, when you put the birth of Christ and his life up to 2 years old, you see all this evidence that we have accumulated. So now then, the New Testament writers will jump all the way to age 30. And we'll pick up the story then at age 30 when he actually starts his ministry and his preaching then out into the world. Okay, class.